The Galactic Concordance Council met high above the planet Viridia, inside a massive station that spun slowly in the quiet dark of space. The chamber was wide and bright, filled with delegates from over 200 different species. Some floated in anti-gravity bubbles, others sat in custom-built chairs, and a few stood on strange limbs that looked nothing like arms or legs. Among them, the human delegation was small, just two people, Daniel Cruz and Maya Patel. They sat quietly near the back, as they often did, because humans were still seen as newcomers, loud and emotional, not quite ready for serious galactic matters. The meeting that day was supposed to be routine. The topic was resource sharing in the Outer Rim, a distant part of space where new quantum fusion deposits had recently been found. These deposits were rare and powerful, able to fuel entire star systems for decades. Every species wanted a fair share, but fairness was never simple in the Concordance. The Virelians, tall and calm with silver skin that shimmered like moonlight, argued for strict control. The Karathi, beings of pure logic with smooth black masks covering their faces, ran endless calculations to prove their case. Others shouted, hissed, or clicked in their own languages, all trying to be heard. Then came the motion. Drafted quietly by a group of elder species, it proposed limiting human access to the new deposits. The reason given was vague but firm: instability concerns. No one said it outright, but everyone knew what it meant. Humans had a reputation. They had rebuilt their own world after nearly destroying it with war and pollution. They cried at funerals, laughed too loudly at celebrations, and sometimes made decisions based on feelings instead of data. To many in the room, that made them dangerous, unpredictable, not to be trusted with powerful resources. When the motion was read aloud, a low murmur spread through the chamber. Some species nodded. Others glanced toward the human seats with pity or amusement. Daniel didn't move at first. He just sat there, hands folded, eyes steady. Maya leaned slightly toward him, her fingers tapping once on her data pad, a silent signal that said, "This is it." Then Daniel stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture dramatically. He simply walked to the center of the speaking platform, where a soft blue light marked the spot for official addresses. All eyes turned to him, some with curiosity, most with mild boredom. "Thank you for the floor," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the translation field that hummed above every seat. "The Earth Alliance has heard the concerns. We understand the caution, but we also understand something else, something this council has never truly accepted." He paused, not for effect, but because he wanted to choose his next words carefully. "For over 30 years, we have asked to be treated as equals, not as children, not as wildcards, not as useful but messy guests. We've shared our tech, our medicine, our labor. We've followed your rules even when they made no sense to us. And still, when something valuable appears, the first thought is to lock us out." A Virelian elder shifted in his seat. A Karathi delegate tilted their head slightly as if recalculating. Daniel went on. "So today we make a choice. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but out of respect, for ourselves and for the future we want to build. The Earth Alliance will no longer attend council sessions. We will not vote. We will not debate. We will not sign agreements until this body sees humanity not as a problem to manage, but as a partner to trust." He stepped back. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Maya stood immediately and followed. Their small team of aides gathered their things in silence and left with them. No shouting, no slamming doors, just the soft hiss of the chamber doors closing behind them. For a long moment, the room was completely still. Then the noise began. At first, it was disbelief. A chuckle from a reptilian delegate, a dismissive wave from a feathered diplomat. "They'll be back by tomorrow," someone muttered. Humans can't stay quiet for long. But as the minutes passed, the mood shifted. The Virelian elder Zorath sat with his eyes closed, deep in thought. The Karathi representative, Kalen, began running silent simulations on their wrist console, fingers moving fast. Others whispered to their aides, sending urgent messages back to their homeworlds. Because something had changed. It wasn't just that humans had walked out. It was how they had done it. No threats, no demands for immediate change. Just a quiet exit and a promise to stay gone until things were different. That kind of discipline didn't fit the image of humans as hot-headed and impulsive. It felt deliberate, calculated, dangerous in a new way. Back on their shuttle, Maya finally let out a breath she'd been holding. "Do you think they'll notice?" Daniel looked out the viewport at the spinning station, its lights like distant stars. "They'll notice when the shipments stop, when the labs go quiet, when their systems start failing and no one answers the call." He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, but also sure. On Viridia Prime, the council session dragged on, but no one could focus. The motion about the quantum fusion deposits was forgotten. Instead, every delegate was thinking the same thing. What happens now that the humans are gone? No one had a good answer. And for the first time in decades, the mighty Galactic Concordance felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The humans had walked out, and somewhere deep inside the grand chamber, panic had already begun to stir. At first, most of the galaxy didn't take the human walkout seriously. News spread through official channels and public feeds, but many dismissed it as another human drama. Loud, brief, and soon forgotten. After all, humans had made bold statements before. They'd threatened to leave trade talks, pulled out of joint science projects, even recalled their ambassadors once during a minor border dispute with the Karathi. Each time they'd returned within days smiling and ready to compromise. So when Daniel Cruz and Maya Patel walked out of the Concordance chamber, few believed it would last. But this time was different. Within hours, human-operated freighters began changing course. Ships that usually docked at Concordance ports, carrying everything from medical supplies to engine parts, diverted to neutral hubs or returned to Sol system space. No warnings, no explanations, just silence on the comms and empty docking bays where human vessels used to be. Trade officers on Viridia Prime sent repeated hails. The replies were automated. Earth Alliance vessels are currently under internal review. No external docking request will be processed. Then came the data blackout. Human research stations across the Outer Rim went dark to Concordance networks, shared databases that once updated in real time, on everything from asteroid trajectories to alien virus strains, stopped syncing. Scientists from other species who relied on human algorithms for climate modeling or stellar navigation found their systems running on outdated code. Errors piled up. Predictions failed. A mining colony on Gethar 7 nearly lost its shield grid because the human-designed calibration tool refused to connect. Still, the council held its ground. Speaker Lyra Vaughn called an emergency session, but the mood was more annoyed than alarmed. "Let them sulk," said a reptilian delegate from the Hesk Collective. "They'll be back when they realize how much they need us." Zorath, the Virelian elder, nodded slowly. "Humans are emotional. This is a protest, not a policy." But Kalen of the Karathi wasn't so sure. Alone in their quarters, they ran new simulations, feeding in the latest data from human-controlled sectors. The results were troubling. Human tech wasn't just helpful. It was woven into the fabric of daily life across dozens of worlds. From water purifiers on dry moons to neural implants used in emergency surgeries, human engineering filled gaps that no other species had bothered to address. And now, those systems were going offline. Back on Earth, things were quiet but busy. Daniel and Maya reported directly to President Elena Ruiz in her office at Luna Base, a sleek dome built into the gray surface of the moon. Outside the window, Earth hung in the blackness. Blue, green and white, still healing but alive. Elena listened without interrupting as Daniel explained what had happened in the chamber. When he finished, she didn't smile or frown. She just leaned back and said, "Good." Then she gave them one order. "Let them feel our absence. No threats. No ultimatums. Just a quiet withdrawal." And so it continued. Human scientists stopped attending virtual conferences. Earth Defense Fleet patrols near contested zones pulled back. Not retreating, just holding position along Sol's borders. No new trade licenses were issued to Concordance merchants. Even human artists and musicians paused their galactic tours. The effect was subtle at first, like a slow leak in a ship's hull. But leaks add up. The first real sign of trouble came from the Selnari colonies. The Selnari were a gentle, plant-like species whose homeworld had been ravaged by a fungal blight decades ago. They'd survived only because human labs developed a special nanite serum that could target the infection without harming their delicate biology. The treatment required monthly doses shipped from Earth's orbital med facilities. 2 weeks after the walkout, the next shipment never arrived. Local stockpiles ran low, then empty. Panic spread through the Selnari enclaves. Parents watched their children weaken. Hospitals sent desperate pleas to Viridia Prime. The Concordance scrambled to replicate the formula, but human nanotech used organic coding that no other species fully understood. Attempts failed. One test batch even made the blight worse. Meanwhile, on the terraforming world of Kestra 4, human-made atmospheric processors began to glitch. These machines, designed to balance oxygen and nitrogen in the thin air, were maintained by human engineers who visited every 6 months. With no one coming, the units overheated. Air quality dropped. Workers had to wear masks just to breathe outside. The colony governor begged the council for help. All they got were promises and delays. Even neutral worlds felt the shift. The free port of Helios, a bustling trade hub run by humans for over 20 years, closed its gates to Concordance-flagged ships. No violence, no arguments, just a polite message. Due to internal review, non-Earth Alliance vessels are temporarily restricted. Merchants from a dozen species stood stranded in orbit, watching their profits vanish. On Viridia Prime, the mood changed fast. What had been annoyance turned to concern. Concern turned to fear. Delegates who once mocked humans now huddled in corners, whispering about supply chains and system failures. The Korathi delegation requested emergency access to human technical archives. Denied. The Virelians proposed a goodwill mission to Earth. Ignored. Speaker Vaughn called another emergency session, this time behind closed doors. We underestimated them, she admitted, her voice low. They're not just walking away. They're showing us how much we depend on them. Zorath finally spoke up. Perhaps we were wrong to see their emotion as weakness. Maybe it is their strength, their care for others, their drive to fix what's broken. We called it chaos, but it built things we now cannot live without. Kalen projected new data onto the chamber wall. Economic forecasts showed a 10% drop in Concordance productivity within a month if human cooperation didn't resume. Medical emergencies were rising. Public unrest was growing on 3 member worlds. The numbers didn't lie. After a long silence, Vaughn made a decision. We need to understand them. Not to control them, to understand. Send someone to Earth, not as a negotiator, but as a listener. The council agreed, though many still hoped it wouldn't come to that. They clung to the belief that humans would crack first, that pride would give way to loneliness, that Earth would come crawling back, eager for the galaxy's approval. But Earth wasn't waiting. While the Concordance debated, human engineers worked double shifts on Luna, upgrading old systems. Farmers on Mars tested new crop strains. Students in Nairobi and Vancouver coded open-source tools for clean energy. Life went on, not in anger but in quiet determination. And far above, in the silent corridors of Viridia Prime, the first true panic began to take root. Not loud, not dramatic, just a cold, creeping realization. The humans weren't coming back until the galaxy changed, and no one knew how to make that happen. 2 weeks passed, and the silence from Earth grew heavier. At first, the Concordance tried to act as if nothing had changed. Official statements called the human absence temporary and regrettable but manageable. Trade ministers reassured their people that alternatives would be found. Scientists promised quick fixes, but with each passing day the cracks widened. On the glimmer moons of Xylos, the first riots broke out. The moons relied on human-designed atmospheric stabilizers to keep their thin air breathable. Without routine updates from Earth's orbital network, the units began failing. Oxygen levels dropped in the lower districts. Families sealed their homes with emergency filters, but those ran out fast. When a child collapsed in a market square, the crowd turned on the local Concordance liaison. They didn't shout about politics or treaties. They just screamed, "Where are the humans?" Security drones moved in, but the anger couldn't be contained. For the first time in 50 years, Xylos declared a state of civil emergency. News of the unrest spread faster than any official report. Other worlds watched, uneasy. If it could happen on Xylos, a stable, mid-tier Concordance member, it could happen anywhere. Then came the medical crisis. The Selnari colonies were now in full collapse. Without the monthly nanite shipments, the fungal blight returned with brutal speed. Hospitals overflowed. Makeshift clinics sprang up in schools and temples. The Selnari elders sent a final plea to Viridia Prime, not a request but a warning. If help does not come within 10 cycles, we will lose an entire generation. The Concordance scrambled. Karathi Labs worked around the clock to reverse engineer the serum, but human nanotech used biologic patterns that defied standard programming. Every test failed. One scientist admitted in private, "It's not just code, it's art, and we don't know how to paint." Even the military felt the strain. The Karathi fleet, once proud and self-sufficient, now hovered near the edge of Sol space, not to threaten but to watch. Their long-range sensors tracked Earth Defense Fleet movements, hoping for a sign of weakness or an opening for contact. But the human ships moved with calm precision, patrolling their borders without aggression, without fear. They weren't hiding. They were waiting. Back on Viridia Prime, the council chambers were no longer places of order. Delegates argued openly in the halls. Accusations flew. The Hess Collective blamed the Varelians for pushing the original motion that sparked the walkout. The Varelians accused the Karathi of arrogance in thinking they could replace human innovation with logic alone. Old alliances frayed, trust eroded. Speaker Lyra Vaughn called meeting after meeting, but no one could agree on a solution. Some demanded sanctions against Earth, cut off their access to galactic markets. Others begged for immediate talks. A few even whispered about sending a warship as a show of force, but Zorath, the Varelian elder, shut that idea down fast. You do not threaten a species that holds your breath in its hands. The truth was sinking in. Humanity hadn't just left the room. They had walked out of the entire system and taken half the machinery with them. On Earth, life continued with quiet focus. In coastal labs, engineers tested new coral-growing drones to heal damaged reefs. In desert farms, solar-powered harvesters gathered crops under clear skies. Children went to school. Artists painted. Musicians played. There was no celebration of the Concordance's pain, no gloating. Just work, just living. President Elena Ruiz gave one short broadcast. We are not punishing anyone. We are choosing ourselves. And in doing so, we hope others learn to choose respect. But the galaxy wasn't listening to speeches. It was feeling the absence in its bones. Then came the final straw. The free trade hub of Helios, the neutral port run by humans, announced it would suspend all concordance-related transactions indefinitely. No more cargo transfers. No more fuel sales. No more repair services. Helios wasn't part of the concordance, but it was the busiest crossroads in known space. Its closure sent shockwaves through every economy. Merchant fleets idled in orbit. Supply chains snapped. A luxury liner carrying diplomats from 5 species ran low on food because its resupply stop was denied. Passengers recorded angry videos that went viral across the net. We're being held hostage by pride, one said. Panic became policy. Speaker Vaughn finally acted. She called a secret session with only the inner council present. No recordings. No observers. Just the leaders of the oldest species gathered in a dim room beneath the main chamber. For the first time, they admitted the truth. They could not function without human cooperation. Not fully. Not for long. We must send someone, Vaughn said. Not a negotiator. Not a spy. Someone who can see them as they are. Not as we imagine them to be. The room fell silent. Who could go? Most envoys carried too much bias. Too much history. Then Kalen of the Karathi spoke. Send Joran. Joran was young for a Mixai diplomat, barely 50 cycles old, but known for curiosity over judgment. The Mixai were amphibious beings from a water-rich world, valued for their empathy and observational skills. Joran had studied human culture quietly for years, collecting old Earth films, reading poetry, even learning basic English. They had never spoken up in council, but they had watched. And listened, the elders agreed. Joran would go to Earth under civilian cover. No official title. No demands, just eyes and ears. 2 days later, Joran boarded a small civilian shuttle bound for Luna Base. Their mission was simple. Find out why humans walked away, and why they weren't coming back. As the shuttle left Viridia Prime behind, Joran looked out at the stars and felt something unfamiliar. Humility. They weren't going to fix the problem. They were going to understand it. And somewhere below on a blue-green planet healing from its own wounds, Daniel Cruz stood on a beach near the Pacific coast, watching the tide roll in. He didn't know Joran was coming. He didn't need to. He knew the galaxy would send someone eventually. The only question was whether they would finally see humans not as tools or threats, but as people. The panic had spread. Now the real test would begin. Yoren arrived on Earth not with fanfare, but with quiet steps. Their shuttle landed at a civilian port near Vancouver, far from government centers or military zones. Dressed in simple gray clothes that mimicked human style, they carried no official badge, no concordant seal. Just a small bag and a translator clipped to their belt. The Mixai skin, smooth and faintly blue, drew a few curious glances, but no one stopped them. Earth was used to visitors, even strange ones. At first, Joran expected grand cities of steel and light, or maybe guarded enclaves where humans plotted their next move. Instead, they found neighborhoods where children rode bikes past community gardens, where old people sat on benches feeding birds, where solar panels glinted on rooftops beside laundry lines. It was ordinary, peaceful, nothing like the tense, polished halls of Viridia Prime. They took a public transit pod to the coast, following a quiet tip from a dock worker who'd heard they were looking for answers. There, on a stretch of rocky shore, stood a low building with wide windows facing the ocean. A sign read, Pacific Renewal Lab, open to all. Inside, scientists in casual clothes worked on coral drones, water filters, and seed banks. No guards, no secrets, just people trying to heal what had been broken. Daniel Cruz was there, not in a suit, but in a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with salt and soil. He was helping a young intern calibrate a drone that would plant seagrass along the seabed. When he saw Joran, he didn't seem surprised. He just nodded, wiped his hands on a cloth, and walked over. "You're not from the council," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. "No," Joran replied, their voice soft, translated into calm English. "I came to see." "To see what?" "What you do when no one is watching." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then you've come to the right place." They walked outside to a bench overlooking the waves. The air smelled of salt and pine. Gulls cried overhead. Joran watched as a group of students launched a small buoy that would monitor ocean acidity. No orders, no supervisors, just shared purpose. "Why did you leave?" Joran finally asked. Daniel didn't answer right away. He watched the horizon, where the sun dipped toward the water. "You've read our history, I assume, wars, pollution, almost ending ourselves more than once. We learned the hard way that power without care is poison, so we changed. Not perfectly, but we tried." He turned to Joran. "But out there in the concordance, you never saw that. You saw our past mistakes and called us unstable. You took our tech, our medicine, our labor, but never our voice. You called us emotional like it was a flaw. But caring isn't weakness. It's why we build hospitals instead of just weapons. Why we share blueprints instead of hoarding them." Joran listened. They had expected anger, blame. But Daniel spoke without bitterness. Only truth. "You think we walked out because we were insulted," Daniel went on. "We didn't. We walked out because we were tired of proving we belong. You don't invite someone to the table and then tell them to sit on the floor." Later, Joran toured the lab. They met Maya Patel, who was teaching a class on open-source climate models. They spoke with engineers who'd designed atmospheric processors now failing on Kestra 4. None of them gloated about the crisis. Instead, they showed Joran how the machines worked. Simple, repairable, built to last. "Anyone can fix these," one engineer said. "You just need hands and heart." That night, Joran stayed in a guest room at a nearby community house. No luxury, just a bed, a window, and a shelf of old books. They read a poem by a human named Mary Oliver. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" The words stayed with them. The next day, they visited a school in a rebuilt part of Seattle. Children of all backgrounds learned together, coding, farming, storytelling. A teacher explained that every student spent one day a week working on real community projects, cleaning rivers, planting trees, helping elders. "We teach them that knowledge means nothing if it doesn't help someone," she said. Joran began to understand. Humanity's strength wasn't in their weapons or their speed or even their tech. It was in their stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better, and that everyone had a role in making it so. They failed often. They argued. They cried. But they kept going. Together. Back on Viridia Prime, the Concordance saw humans as chaotic because they didn't follow rigid logic. But Joran now saw the deeper order, the kind built on empathy, not equations. On their last evening, Joran sat again with Daniel on the shore. The stars were bright. "What do you want from the Concordance?" Joran asked. "Nothing we don't already have," Daniel said. "We have our home, our people, our purpose. We don't need your approval. But if you want to work with us, if you truly see us as equals, then come with clean hands and open eyes." Not demands. Not fear, Joran nodded. They finally understood why the humans hadn't returned. It wasn't about winning. It was about being seen. The next morning, Joran boarded their shuttle. As it lifted off, they looked down at the green hills, the winding rivers, the quiet towns. Earth wasn't perfect, but it was alive, and it was whole, not because it had never broken, but because it kept choosing to mend. When Joran returned to Viridia Prime, they didn't go straight to the council chamber. They went to their quarters and wrote a single message to be shared with every delegate. They are not what we thought. They are more. And for the first time, the Concordance began to listen. Joran's message spread through Viridia Prime like a quiet tide. At first, many dismissed it as the soft thinking of a young Mixai. But then the Selnari ambassador stood during a routine session and spoke without notes. Her voice trembled not with anger but with grief. "My youngest grandchild is in a hospital bed because your pride kept medicine from reaching us. The humans never asked for thanks. They just sent the serum every month for 20 years. Now my child breathes shallowly, and your lab still cannot copy what they gave freely." She looked around the chamber. "If that is chaos, then give me more of it." Her words struck deep. Others followed. The governor of Kestra 4 shared footage of workers struggling to breathe in failing air. A merchant from Helios described ships rotting in orbit while families went hungry. Even Zorath, the Varelian elder, rose and said, "We called them children because they felt too much. But perhaps it is we who have forgotten how to feel at all." Speaker Lyra Vaughn saw the shift. The fear had turned to shame and shame to resolve. She called Joran to the inner council and asked for a full report. Joran spoke plainly. No jargon, no politics, just what they had seen. Schools teaching service, labs sharing knowledge, people choosing to heal instead of hoard. "They are not asking for power," Joran said. "They are asking to be seen as they are." That night, Vaughn drafted a new proposal. Not a treaty, not a compromise, a reset. She called it the Accord of Equals. It had 3 simple terms. 1, every species, including humanity, would have 1 equal vote in all matters. 2, all scientific advances, past, present, and future, would be shared openly across the Alliance. 3, Earth would hold a permanent seat on the Security Synod, the body that oversaw peace and defense. The next morning, she presented it to the full council. Silence fell. Some delegates looked stunned, others angry. The HESC representative stood and shouted that it gave humans too much influence. But before others could join, the Selnari ambassador stood again. "Influence," she said. "They held our lives in their hands and never once squeezed. What they ask for is not influence. It is dignity." Debate raged for hours. Old powers clung to their privileges. But the tide had turned. One by one, species that had suffered in silence raised their hands in support. The Mixai, the Glimmer Moons, the free colonies of the Rim. Even the Karathi, after running new models, admitted that long-term stability required human participation. Kalen simply stated, "Logic confirms exclusion is inefficient. Inclusion is survival." When the final vote came, it passed by the narrowest of margins, 107 to 98, with 15 abstentions. It was enough. A message was sent to Earth, not a demand, not a plea. Just an invitation. The Concordance accepts your terms. Will you return? 2 days later, Daniel and Maya arrived on Viridia Prime. They wore simple clothes, no uniforms, no badges. They walked into the chamber not as petitioners, but as partners. The room was silent as they took their seats, this time not at the back but at the center table. Speaker Vaughn stood. "We were wrong," she said plainly. "We saw your heart and called it weakness. We took your gifts and gave you silence in return. Today we begin again." Daniel nodded. "Then let's build something better." The signing of the Accord of Equals took less than an hour. No grand ceremony. No speeches. Just names added to a document that would change everything. Afterward, the Selnari ambassador approached Daniel with tears in her eyes. "The first shipment arrived this morning," she whispered. "My grandchild is breathing easier." He simply said, "We're glad to help." Back on Earth, President Elena Ruiz watched the broadcast from Luna Base. When it ended, she turned off the screen and walked outside. The moon's surface stretched before her, quiet and still. Far away, Earth glowed in the dark. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just stood there, knowing that trust, once broken, takes time to grow back. But it had started. In the weeks that followed, human engineers returned to Kestra 4 to repair the atmospheric processors. Scientists from a dozen species joined Earth labs to co-develop new medical tools. Trade routes reopened, but this time with fair terms. The free port of Helios welcomed concordant ships again, but with new rules. No species would be favored. All would be treated the same. The Earth Defense Fleet remained near Sol's borders, but their alert status dropped to normal. Not because they trusted the galaxy completely, but because they now had a seat at the table, and the power to protect what they'd built. On Viridia Prime, the council meetings changed. Voices that were once ignored were now heard. Decisions took longer, but they were stronger. Humans still cried at sad stories and laughed too loud at jokes, but no one called it immaturity anymore. They called it humanity. And in a small coastal lab on Earth, Daniel stood again on the shore watching the tide. Maya joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. He watched a drone plant seagrass in the distance. "Not because of treaties," he said, "but because we showed them that care is not weakness. It's the only thing that lasts." Above them, stars burned in the quiet sky, and somewhere between them, ships from many worlds flew not as masters or servants, but as neighbors, learning slowly how to walk together,